paper. Dave Lysecki, Mohammed Mukadem, and some girl named Kristen Thomason.
She hasn't shown.
As co-authors of another paper, and our brilliant discussant, Sarita Schonebeck, who joined us from just over the border, which is awesome. So I'm really excited for this conversation. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me okay? I'm going to stand up just because that's prefer to do this. Okay. Yes, thanks. I'm Sarita Schonebeck. I'm a professor at Michigan School of Information. So this is my first time at WeRobot. I love this discussant model. I think we're doing it wrong in my home discipline, so I'm going to come back with that. But this session is a really fascinating topic, so I was very excited that Kristen reached out and asked if I would engage with it. Okay, so generative AI. It can be used to create digital representations of people. So our faces, our bodies, our movement, our voice, our expressions. And the question that we're going to focus on, or at least I will kick us off with, is when generative AI is used to create digital representations of people, what kinds of rights and protections should be in place for those people? So let's take a few examples. Thanks. Sexual deepfakes, that's come up multiple times, including the last session. When generative AI is used to create sexual, intimate content of people without their consent, that is a violation of their privacy and their dignity. And most people agree that should be regulated. That was an example in both of the papers here as well. Another example from Yuki's paper was, let's say you create an image of Obama playing soccer. Probably that may or may not exist, but let's say you create it. Are there any rights or protections in place? And there, maybe not. There's a podcast from a few years ago where Obama was asked by the interviewer, "You are the most deep-faked person in history. How do you feel about that?" And he said, "I'm a high-profile political figure. That comes with the territory." In contrast, recently in the US, I'm based in the US, Donald Trump said, "I'm going to pass the Take It Down bill, and I'm going to use it for myself for pictures I don't like." So that's that for sexual deepfakes. And then let's take one more example, and that would be children. And in the case of their paper, I'm going to call it David's paper, I guess. First author, David's paper. For children, let's say a child who has cancer, a medicalized child. Should you use generative AI to create an image of them? And under what conditions is that ethically acceptable? Okay, so I'll come back to the question again of when there's a generated digital representation of a person, what rights and protections should be in place? Okay, so let's talk about some of the risks that can happen. And I want to propose we separate this out into two categories of a generated digital person. One is a representation that is in the likeness of a real person. Okay, so you could try creating an image of anyone in this room, and maybe it would be able to do it, maybe not, depending on how famous you are. And the other category would be people who are not intended to be a real person. So just create a person, but the intent is not to represent any known person in the world. I'm going to propose we split it out into two categories. Okay, so let's start with the first category. What are the risks when you create a generated digital image of a person whose likeness is represented, or the real person? So some of the risks are the lack of consent about that image being created in the first place. Lack of transparency about how it's created. There's lots of tools to create people's images. Some above the boards, ChatGPT has regulations about policies about what you can create, but lots of them are sort of on the dark web. You can create all kinds of stuff. There's little guardrails around it. Lack of control about how that image or that content is used. What is someone going to do with it? And lack of consent or knowledge about what training data went into creating that model. Right? So there's many stages throughout the production of a generated image where there's lack of consent and there's ethical risks around, should we be creating this, and what does a person do if it's created in their likeness? And so one question is, well, does the law protect generated personal content about a person? And that's what Yuki focuses on. Generated personal data is what he calls it. And he focuses on GDPR specifically. Does GDPR apply to generated personal data? And so I'll just summarize a few key points he makes. One is, it's pretty textual analysis, at least from my reading, as defined by GDPR. So it's about personal data or any information which are related to an identified or identifiable natural person. And here he makes the case that generated data can fall under that if a person is identifiable. He notes that dead people is sort of tricky because is it a natural person? But for the most part, it works. GDPR also talks about automated processing of personal data, and you can make the case there. I think that with relative ease, that generative AI is in fact a form of automated processing. That's pretty straightforward. And then the third one is profiling. This one's more complicated. So that requires evaluating personal aspects of a person, right? So it's analysis, prediction. And here it's less clear. So to go back to our deepfake example, deepfakes might be created, but without any intent for analysis or prediction, the way you might have for credit scores or home loans or things like that. So deepfakes don't count. So there, it wouldn't fall under necessarily GDPR. And now we have a problem, right? It doesn't govern that kind of content. Yuki's article also points out difficulties with accuracy. And I think both of the papers don't try to tackle this very thorny question of when an image is created, what does it mean to be in the likeness of someone, to reflect a real person? So if I create an image of Kristen using generative AI and 67% of you say, yes, I agree, that's Kristen, does the law now apply? Or does it need to be 90%? Or is it some other category? Or does a machine tell us, yes, that's Kristen? Or does she tell us? All of these have trade-offs and flaws, of course. And both papers, I think, don't try to tackle this, but also kind of need to, because you need to know, is it a real person? Is it not a real person? Can you demonstrate that? So let's switch to the question of not real people. And this is what David et al.'s paper focuses on. And they focus specifically on medicalized children, which is a group of children have some medical condition, things like that. You don't actually define medicalized children, I think, in the paper. That would be helpful. We kind of know what it is intuitively, but and here, so images of medicalized children are used for education, awareness, things like that. And they're saying there's a lot of ethical risks around doing that. The children cannot consent. I believe that should be children cannot assent. So maybe some clarification on that, maybe not. But whatever it is, children cannot consent. And if they're medicalized, they may not be able to assent. And so they can't, now their images are on the internet in perpetuity, and their parents made that decision and they're medicalized, and maybe as they progress, they don't want to be there and not in their medicalized condition, right? And then these images can be explicit, they can be graphic, they can be intimate, right? Medicalization. So they say, hey, what if we use generative AI? Would that be more ethical? That's how I'm interpreting it. Would it be more ethical to use generative AI images of a medicalized child for this awareness, for advocacy, things like that, than using a real person? And my sense is the framing is, yes, we should consider doing this. And so we should, and my response would be, I'm somewhat convinced by this, but there's still a lot of ethical issues. So one would be, as they point out, that training data still requires training data of people who are medicalized or disabled and of children, neither of whom may have consented to being in that training data. Now you're just kind of putting them together. The paper calls for development of ethically sourced AI models. And I would like to pose the question, theoretically, yes, that is possible. Practically, is that realistically possible? So we've talked multiple times about, in the session yesterday, on open and closed models and software, that a few companies control the whole ecosystem. Is it really possible to create ethically sourced AI models? And if not, how does that complicate any of these conversations around creating images of people? And then another issue would be representation. So in the disability community, there's calls for desire to be represented. And so often that community says, we don't want like actors to portray us or people who are not disabled. We want to represent ourselves. We want to have our voice here. And so a question might be, would a community, medicalized, disabled, be okay with now generative AI technology representing them, which is even further away from sort of them representing themselves? So I think that would be an ethical sort of community-focused question to focus on. Okay, so to summarize, I'm going to switch right into discussion, so engage everyone. I think here's some of the compelling kind of issues that the papers bring up in my mind. So again, what rights and protections do people have when generative AI is used to create content in their likeness? And do existing laws, GDPR, US, wherever it is, cover those protections? Right? Does it count for generative AI? Now, what about when generative AI is used to create an image that is not in a person's likeness? And might we be misled into thinking that is more ethical, even though it requires humans to produce that generative AI content, right? And then I would say that the question of humanness is kind of at the heart of both papers. And so we know a lot about what rights people have, but what rights do people have when it is the digital representation of themselves? Seems like a big, open, messy question. So I'll leave it with that. And
I think you guys could start first, and then I'll follow up. That's okay.
Sure. Thank you guys for having us. I feel very out of place. I'm a pediatrician. I have no law background. I wasn't even sure how to dress today. I was like, do I dress like a lawyer, like a professor, like a maybe like a Silicon Tech bro? We wanted to highlight a situation that has no perfect answers, and the generative AI portion of it is one side of the coin. The first half of their paper focuses on the implications for our current system. And our current system, every month, you guys are probably see a different advertisement for Sick Kids Hospital. And those are real children. And those images have the potential to follow them throughout their lives. Insurance companies later in their lives may be able to connect their current persona to their medical illness. That is their private medical information that is being put out there in the internet forever. And many of those children never get a chance to either consent or assent based on their age at the time it's released. And then after it's released, there's no chance to revoke consent. And so there is a real risk to what we're currently doing and have been doing for decades. And those risks, the additional risks secondary to the advent, particularly of AI, of facial recognition technology, of age predictive technology to track age over time, of data linkages between names and social accounts and family members that can be tracked through social accounts, all the way down to the very DNA of individuals that have been both leaked and sold by 23andMe, as you guys are probably well aware. So I can not only identify from a photo of an adult, potentially their medical history as a child, but I can also link that to generations of family members. So generative AI offers a alternative option to create artificial children in the likeness of not one specific child, but of many children to represent their experiences. I think as a society, we are not ready to see that. If people knew that Sick Kids was pushing out AI-generated children, they would be a lot less likely to donate in response to those advertisements. And yet, the potential harms of the current system need to be evaluated. And I think we need to have a discourse as a society about what is the role of generative AI, what are the potential, what are our responsibilities for protecting children, particularly when it pertains to private medical information, and how do we solve this conundrum?
That was perfect. Thank you. And I'm just going to add one thing in response to your excellent comment about different communities and their voice and choice over how and who represents them. And I think there's something that we tried to problematize in the paper, and maybe we even expand on it as we work on it, about how we also are in a situation where parents who are not disabled, or at least not disabled in the same way as their child or part of that same community, are the ones making the choice. And I say that as a parent who's done this, are the ones making the choice about that child's role in representing the community. So I think there's also something in the possibility of some form of anonymity while still contributing to the production. So the image is made of real people, real members of the community, but it's not made by the decision of non-disabled people to put those children in that community. I feel like I'm maybe not saying this properly, but I think there's something challenging there, and I don't have an answer, but we try to problematize it a bit in the paper.
I think answering that question of representation as well, I know we had discussions about this, but not too many people realize there's this dark and toxicity around medical and child marketing, and we've had conversations with people and families that question why their child wasn't chosen, or question that this child doesn't represent theirs, and it creates this like toxicity and very competitive setting that not too many people realize is like a dark side of MCM. I think that was just a super influential and kind of thing that we wanted to address, and I think AI and Gen AI does a good job of answering that question, almost eliminating that toxicity.
Thanks. I wish I was part of the other paper's co-author so that I could just say like I agree with my co-authors, but I'm on the different paper. Well, first of all, there are several things that, yeah. So there are several things I need to, I think, make a quick announcement before I jump on the topic. I had bad cold, seasonal cold before coming here. Now, to be clear, I consulted my doctor. She said it's okay that I travel and then also participate in conference. I'm not contagious, but occasionally I do cough, and then my voice is very, I don't know, maybe uncomfortable hearing. I'm sorry if that's the case. Even if I'm coughing, please ignore me. And if you have difficulty hearing me, please do let me know. Second, thank you very much for a great introduction of our papers. I think it really captures what our concerns and the issues, especially how you set the issues. I really like it. One thing I thought is you put this two cases where one is generative AI, generated content about existing people versus non-existent people, but maybe the challenge is the line between the two is blurring, and maybe we cannot perhaps like say this is about existing people. As you said, if it looks like Kristen Thompson, then do we say it's personal data about her? That's probably one of the challenges raised by this technology, generative AI, I think. And to kind of like add my perspective on that, or like a high level, the way I see the issue is, I think we are supposed to use, or at least the AI privacy and data protection laws are laws that we can use to address those issues. But the challenge is, or the maybe the pitfall that we should not be falling into is we just include everything as personal data. Generated personal data is also personal data. So we're just going to apply all the principles and rules regarding personal data and say, hey, we have a solution. That's probably a wrong, maybe an approach to address the problem. So that's how I try to set the issue, perhaps, if that makes sense. With that, we go to the floor. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Kate Darling, various affiliations.
Affiliated.
No medical affiliations, so this is a new topic for me. I think like when I first read the abstract and then like the paper topic, I was like, this seems very niche.
Correct.
Yeah.
Next question.
But no, I actually found it very compelling. I think you could do a better job explaining what is unique about this use of images compared to other contexts where people's images are used or images are generated. Like, it seems that there's some really unique harms here. So not like the Star Wars kid got made fun of, but like examples that you can make of real or even speculative instances where people's medical history is being used against them, or their images being taken out of context, or whatever it is. Another thing that came to mind is you could situate it in some of the conversations that are happening right now around AI generated images that are like for a good cause, quote unquote. So like companies generating Black people to use in their ads for more diversity, where, you know, they're like, hey, representation matters. Look, we're doing something good. And people are like, fuck you. You could have paid Black people to be in your ads. But this is a very different situation because there are these harms the kids, right? And then the thing that I found most interesting and would have liked to hear more about was this idea of both like coercion and then also the competitive culture. And I would have liked to hear a lot more about people's experiences. Like, what was this informal survey you did? What's an informal survey? Like, can we get more details on how this actually works in practice, whether people are being pressured into this, how it works exactly? Because that, I think, is also one of the unique things about this situation.
I think we certainly can. Are you on any grant boards? We put forward a grant to the privacy commissioner. Unfortunately, we weren't successful. But it was to collect qualitative data formally from families. The informal nature of the survey, how this started is I mentioned Sick Kids, and most people have seen advertisements for Sick Kids. I don't know how many of you have seen necessarily advertisements for Sick Kids. It's in Toronto. It's the biggest children's hospital in Canada, for those of you not from here. Sick Kids fundraising budget outpaces many children's hospitals' operating budgets, right? It is impossible to keep up, and families in Windsor will be more exposed to Sick Kids advertisements than they will to their local children's hospital, for sure. And so on one hand, as a children's hospital, you without a massive fundraising budget, you're limited. And then if you're trying to create a new facility, as we are in Hamilton, trying to create a pediatric hospice, we don't have a facility. We don't actually have patients to work with. I have patients because I'm also affiliated with the Children's Hospital, but the Children's Hospital doesn't want to share their patients for fundraising. Like there is a dark side to all this. There is a real competitive nature. So we created some generated images for the purpose of exploring how do people feel about this. And my expectation was that families would say, as came up, you know, this is awful. We want representation. And clinicians said, we think this is awful. Families should have representation. And families were like, this would be great if we didn't have to bare our souls all of the time. That when you are someone's physician and you've saved their child's life, and then you ask them, will your child be on the billboard? There's no eliminating that relationship unless we make a rule that says your child can be on a billboard across the country, but they can't, like, so you can participate, but you can't participate for your hospital type of, we would have to separate things like that. And so that's where the informal survey came out, asking clinicians, asking families, and then it led to this sort of partnership of trying to explore this more fulminantly.
I think too, you're absolutely right to expand on that. We should expand on that. And also, it's hard. Like, I edited the paper and I changed some of the wording too, because I'm like the families I know are going to see this and think I'm criticizing them. Like, it's hard because you want to give back as a parent to the person who saved your kid's life, right? Like it's not nefarious, it's not manipulative, although there is a like children's hospital fundraising industrial complex to be discussed. But it's a hard thing to like, it's a privacy issue in a way that's more complicated than anything I've ever reflected on. Don't put an academic in a situation of like thinking about this stuff in real life, because
I think
you get
one
weird
thing
papers.
one thing the paper could do a better job of is really being more nuanced about some of the benefits, and that would be a way to like not make people feel like they're being criticized.
Yeah.
And then one way to do that would be also to draw directly on people's experiences, or like having just some quotes from people.
That's where we need
their own narratives.
the qualitative, like to let people convey their story in their way. Yeah. So fund us.
Yeah, anybody who's on a grant board is welcome.
Jesse Wu, Policing Project NYU. Sorry, I'm not on a grant board.
Next question.
My comments are all for Yuki, and so yeah, get ready.
Oh, that's my goal.
First of all, the big high level comment on the title is I think you need to either change the title or add a subtitle, because just looking at it first blush, I thought, well, it's going to be about synthetic data, which is like, kind of interesting from a technical perspective. But it's not really about synthetic data at all, right? You've identified this like kind of weird gaping hole at the heart of GDPR. And so like, that's just like, you're going to miss, I think, some people if you don't like give them a bit more. And I agree with Sarita that you really got to do something with this like accuracy point. And like, I think you need to like start drawing some lines or like staking out claims and, saying like what you think should be on either side of the line. Because as I'm reading, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's about accuracy, but then so what? And what sort of, that doesn't tell me much about what techniques should be in or out. And I'm like, well, like if you have, and it seems like there ought to be some other principle, and I don't know what it is, beyond just accuracy. Like, if I'm doing linear regression and you're like, okay, based on this one attribute, I fit on the line, like, is that personal data? Like, that intuitively, that doesn't seem like that's generated personal data, but maybe it is telling someone something about me. So maybe it is. And so just like really grappling with that, I think would like give the paper a lot more oomph. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Those are very important, very helpful. So quickly on the first point, what would you suggest as a title? Because I do want to retain.
Shit, I'm gonna leave that for the next.
Okay.
That's for the.
Call it the gaping hole in the GDP.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'll take note of that. Yeah. So you're right that first, one of those responses I got from people I shared those drafts and ideas is how is that different from synthetic data? Or they even advised me that I should read those before reading mine. So you're right that it might be a little bit confusing. So I do have to think maybe like play with subtitles. The thing is, and it relates to the second point, which is this is like a compilation. The draft that I submitted to We Robot Conference is a compilation from larger project that I have. And in that larger project, I do have more elaborated detailed part about accuracy and how things should be, etc. Still a work in progress. So, and for that reason, I'm not so sure how I should capture the entire thing and then subtitling it, etc. So I think something that is, I should continue thinking about it. On the second part, you're right. As I said, there are a few things that's definitely left, dropped from this draft. But what I thought like one step, a solution, a step forward is, for example, the German local data protection law that talks about if it has to meet scientific criteria in order to, if you're creating some scores that's probative of future actions, etc. It has to be scientifically backed up, etc. So those like additional requirements may be a little bit helpful in accuracy context. But I do also agree that there are many things that dropped out regarding transparency principle, etc. So I will try to work on that as well. Thanks.
Great. Okay. Well, I have two questions. The first is for Dave. So I was playing ping pong with Wozek last night, and I stepped on my ankle, and I twisted it. And I just want to get
It's
okay.
just a sprain.
Okay, just a sprain. That's right. Okay, yeah, that's what I was double check. Thank you. I'm gonna ice it and ibuprofen. I'm hearing it. Okay, but my other question is for Yuki. So what I really liked your paper a lot. It was such an interesting angle. The fact that it was treating European law led me to have a lot of questions about how Europe thinks about the right of publicity, because the most obvious frame is right of publicity. You know, I mean, you think about the ad where somebody mimics James Earl Jones' voice, which famously was a Reddit publicity case. But not just that, but you even have examples where people made robot versions of other people, like Vanna White or the two people, Cliff and Norm from Cheers. And there were these fights in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals about whether or not a robot version of a person was that person, right? And what's interesting in the publicity context is the more accurate you are, the more likely you're going to have a successful appropriation of likeness claim. You know what I mean? And so it got me thinking about just why treat this as privacy versus publicity. Is publicity missing something? Is our privacy and publicity collapsing because nowadays, in order, the most efficient, direct way to violate people's publicity involves training a model and then faking them, like with like Albert Einstein. Obviously, Albert Einstein's not a lot, but you know what I mean. But like Barack Obama, you know. And so I just want to get your sort of your take on that. I mean, what is the relationship between this body of law and publicity in the U.S. and in Europe? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you only sprained your ankle when you were playing table tennis. Oh, that wasn't a question to me.
No.
Okay, sorry. So, well, first of all, thank you very much for that very thoughtful, insightful comment, because right to publicity as well as copyright law is something that I should and I'm planning to draw upon, even if my project focuses heavily on data protection and privacy law, namely GDPR. Because one of the sub-issues that I'm struggling is, I also alluded in the paper, which is when is new data or new personal data generated, and when is it just a restatement of existing personal data, right? The example I wrote in the paper is I'm 171 centimeters tall. Saying I am short or I am tall sounds like merely a restatement of what we already know. But if you start saying my weight is 60 whatever, and then he needs workout, he's obsessed with I don't know, table tennis or not table tennis, but like those things. If they categorize me into different groups, then maybe that's like a new information generated. And then I'm thinking like copyright law is going to be very helpful in terms of when new work is created, etc. Now, I'm sorry that maybe that was off the topic, but going back to your right to publicity thing, you're right that lack of accuracy doesn't always work against the situation. Maybe the more it's like you, then you have better outcomes. So I think that's something that I haven't really explored enough, but now I will go deeper on that one. Is that, yeah. Yeah. Definitely, yeah. Thank you very much for that.
I wanted to add one thing that's bothering me that isn't, so David's paper focuses on an ethical lens, and then Yuki's is a legal regulatory lens. And there's a space where I think they're completely, not your papers, those two lenses are incompatible. And that's, use generative AI to create an image of a person that's just their body, say in a sexual position or intimate kind of context, and maybe there's not a face or identifiability. That to me is an absolute violation of sort of ethical rights and moral rights in the person's body, but there's no identifiability. The law, I think, isn't going to try to address that because that just would be hard to constrain, or maybe I'm wrong on that, but that seems like a space where just all these conversations don't know how to handle that.
I really want to add that to that point because I think it's really important. So I think there's a small passage, and I even spoke with Susie Dunn today, that when we have deepfake pornography, we often pay attention to the person's likeness, the face, so like Taylor Swift, etc. But actually, their bodies are made from, I don't know, could be sex workers or just not other lay persons who may not have that, they're not famous, but it's also exploited in that sense. So I think it's something that we should also explore more.
Hi, Vasanthi, University of Windsor. My first question is, the first group. When I was reading about the ethics, and in this conversation here, I think you're talking more about the dark web of marketing and all of that. And I think beyond beyond just medical marketing, there's this whole question about the ethics of the philanthropy sector on the whole, what Ruth Wilson Gilmore called the shadow of the shadow state. And here, when I'm thinking about these use of children's faces, thinking of organizations like War Child, Oxfam, using Global South, Faces of Global South Children. And there's been a lot of criticism about how that's, it's almost like poverty porn is the word, or development porn that has been used. So there are these larger ethics about that's been in conversation about the ethics of these organizations in general who use children for their thing. But I don't know how that disappears just because they're using the consent issue disappears, sure, if you're using a generated face, but the ethics of this whole complex in general doesn't disappear. The fact that you would, even if you're using a fake Sudanese child's face to collect money for War Child, there is still an issue about this whole ethics of this whole thing itself, which just seems to be that what it's doing is this is generative AI is making the bad ethics to begin with go on steroids. It's just amplifying what was something bad to begin with. So I don't know if that's addressed. And Yuki, with respect to your paper, I was thinking about generative personal data in the employment context. And here, I was thinking about a few cases, vaguely speaking, about how certain employers have been caught creating fake employees from employee data to entrap workers in worker compensation claims. Or so they create these fake employee to figure out if a worker is actually injured in the job. So this has been and then I think Google's whole thing about where they use forget what the plank is called. They use employee data to figure out productivity, how much to pay, and even like how much a person eats. They have this thing in their cafeteria, which gives out large plates and small plates to do calorie management of their employees. So there's this whole space, I feel, in employee surveillance and thing where the predictive algorithms can go into creating fake employees and fake data of employees as well, which I thought was quite interesting. Especially the Google example, it's always fascinated me. You go to the cafeteria and it's like, oops, you already had a piece of cake. Now you just get a smaller cake. That's why it's
You can go first.
Okay,
I have
sure.
some thoughts. But.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. Like, I think you flag a really important point about that bigger question around the ethics of the philanthropic industry. We in this that I think could be like almost like a meta paper to the paper that we're working on here. Because what we're trying to propose in this paper, and like obviously add in, is like there are children whose photos are being used, and we did focus in the Canadian context for like Canadian children's hospitals or other sort of support agencies or whatever the case might be. And the idea was, well, what if instead of that child as an individual, there's an ethically collected, which noted on the practicalities, but an ethically collected data set that actually allows for all of those children to come together in some sense in an image. So it's, I mean, I take your point. I think it's a really important one. It's like, I think the way we were thinking about it was like, how do we actually avoid that exploitation, but still allow for participation? And could generative AI actually bridge that really tricky issue? But there's a bigger context to it that is, I think, would need to be its own paper for the sake of like really diving into that critique, that I think rightly would connect not just what's happening in Canada, but what happens around the world. I mean, also to Kate's point, like I'm thinking of that like all eyes on Gaza Gen AI image. Like nobody was putting out actual images on social media, and then all of a sudden a Gen AI image, and everybody's like it went viral, and it was a very strange moment where it's like, why are we comfortable with generative AI, but we're not comfortable with images taken by journalists or by folks who are in Gaza? So I mean, I think you have a very important point, but I think we're trying to bridge that on like the micro level, I guess.
Yeah, what I was thinking during, as you were speaking, let's theoretically say that War Child was a perfect philanthropic agency, meaning 100% of what you donated went to that child, and that's the real child. Then I think it's very fair to say, this is a real situation, you can help. You as a consumer can choose to turn off the TV or not, but it's a real situation. The ethics to me is not using that child, it's in what proportion of your donation makes it to that child. And I think in Canada, there's a jingle that we hear, it's like 1-877 cars for kids, donate your cars today. And apparently that money doesn't really make it to the kids. So I think that's where it gets really blurry. But I would say that when you're telling true stories and truly offering people the truth of the world, whether in Gaza or Sudan or elsewhere, and if people want to choose to contribute to that, then they should, and we need to police philanthropic agencies to make sure that the money's making it that way. In terms of briefly the practicality piece, and this is now my opportunity to pick a bone with anybody who's in law in this room about something called the fine print. None of the rest of us read it. Newsflash. So when I accept the terms and conditions to my iCloud account, I don't read that at all. iCloud has billions of photographs in it, right? If Apple said, we will give you a 25% discount on your iCloud account if you let us use your data in training then people would consent to using their data in training. And that could create, I mean, it would exist within something like Apple, but then a consented training model. I don't think you need a billion pictures of medicalized children to create a medicalized children model. I think you need a model that can create children. And then you need a significant but smaller data set that can make medicalized children. And because we've talked about this, what is a multi-billion-dollar complex of children's philanthropy, that money should make its way back to the families, right? So then those families that want to contribute their child's medical images can be paid. Those, for images that will go into the training but not actually be produced or put out there, and then the company that then has that software can make medicalized images of children, can sell them to children's hospitals and elsewhere, and rather than money going elsewhere into the ether of philanthropy, it can actually make it back to the people who own the content, which are the families, which and a lot of them are in great need as a result of their child's medicalization.
I think they took the words right out of my mouth, so I don't think I can really add too much more to that.
So regarding employment context, thanks very much for that important point out. I think it was one of the sessions yesterday that somebody mentioned if you want a Junwan's contract worker, and I think that one literature touches a lot on So and just like workers are quantified and digitalized, I think there are many generated personal data in that context as well, that like the likelihood of this person leaving the job soon, and then therefore, because the risk is high, we're going to intervene, and then so that the person will not leave the job, or would make her leave the job because we don't really like, that sort of thing is happening. Again, because of that special context, like employment context, there's like a contractual relationship with the employer, employee, etc. I think there's a risk that it's even more exploited, or that generated score is not even like subject to checks and balance, or not balance, but scrutiny. And there could be like a very dubious ones going on. So that's I also agree with you that that's could be a one instance where this problem is acute, I think.
Hello, I am Hashimi Soon at Windsor Law and clinical researcher at Henry Ford Health. As someone who's a bit more conservative when it comes to using AI generated images just to replicate human hardship and then invoke emotion, I did leave the paper with about MCM feeling the kind of conviction that I wasn't expecting about using AI generated versions. But I feel that the piece missing for me to have the confidence in it was just across maybe comparison analysis between other remedies to the current MCM model and the AI generated. So just seeing maybe why would a new, more holistic and temporal consent process to the MCMs that we have right now compared to the AI, generated one?
So, like I think the theme of this conference, this paper is part of a larger series of discourses that we've had, and one of them, the largest, looks across at human media generation for the purposes of healthcare, and looks at essentially the 4 ways that can be done. And one is through documentation, just taking pictures of real people. One is through production, which is using actors. One is illustration, which and one is AI generated images, and illustration, whether by hand, by CGI, computer generated versus AI. Really, it's probably a spectrum. That where we're drawing the line is where the images are indistinguishable from real life, and because that's where I think the controversy comes up with AI. And each of those different modalities has its downsides. And so we are looking at the bigger context, because some people might say that the answer is just to use actors, but of course actors, one, still needs to use child actors, and there's ramifications to children actors. It's very costly, and so then it further de-democratizes children's fundraising, and it is you guys can tell me from your eyes, as a trained eye, I look at an actor child pretending to be a sick child, and it's just like, well, that's just fake. They're never particularly accurate, and so it sort of fails on each. There is one very ethical solution, which is take pictures of children now, put them in a vault, open them in 20 years, and ask the child as an adult, can we use your photo? I don't think the philanthropy sector is going to like, just waiting 20 years. But there are potential other remedies, and it is about trying to achieve the collective goals, and generally the collective goals are beneficent goals, right? We are looking to find a way that best serves the most number of children possible. But I think current practices best serve the child's population, but on the backs of a minority of children and with potential consequences.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I think we're just like from our perspective, and I'm putting words in your mouths, but I think like from our conversations and everything, we're trying to think about like, what's the end goal? And if the end goal is participation and some semblance of anonymity or pseudo anonymity, is there a way to achieve that? And like Dave said, there's another paper that looks at some of the drawbacks to those other alternatives if the goal is participation from the community.
I think part of our intention here is to really just start that conversation, right? There's no perfect answer right now, and there might be benefits to both, but really starting that conversation and kicking that off, I think, is important to how we facilitate these conversations moving forward. And I mean, there's multiple disciplines within medicine. One might benefit one discipline better than another. We just don't know. So really finding a place to start and then continue, I think, is really important here with that.
Hi. Before I introduce myself, get to my question, I have a question for the pediatrician.
I'm not a cat pediatrician.
Good answer. No, my question was
But
just.
cat bites do need antibiotics. You're correct about that.
Thank you. My question is, are you more willing to provide advice to adults who seek to be treated by you if they always act like children? You don't need to answer.
That's on recording.
Oops. Hi, I'm Sue Gluck, and my comment/question is not in my former role at Microsoft, not as my CATS employee, but rather in my role as a member of the scientific advisory board for a charity called Flock, which is intended to improve the treatment and lives of people with inherited metabolic disorders like PKU. Thrilled you're a pediatrician because one person in the room will know what I'm talking about. But basically, if you have PKU or other metabolic disorders, it's a very difficult life you have in front of you in terms of eating, because you can't, if you consume too much protein, and by too much, I basically mean a little bit, you will give yourself irreversible brain damage. So, accumulating over the years, so very difficult problem. What Flock has done is we've, in addition to for years providing information you can look up to track how much protein is in the food you'd like to eat, we've made an app so you can look up your food, track your food, track physical activity like from your Apple Watch. If you're so inclined, track your mood. You can play games, and that's data about, how is your mental acuity. And we're working now on getting consent to use this data for medical research with all the complications of, some of the people are adults, some of the people are children, consent and assent, and so on. But one thing that we're doing that I think is interesting for you is when people withdraw their consent. Initially, we were just going to tell the person, well, the data you've already provided us, if it's being used in a study, will continue to be used, but none of your data from this date forward will be used. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to try to influence people to be able to actually remove that data. Now, that's a horrible ask because you've already trained your model. Are you supposed to go back to the very beginning and retrain it and use all that electricity? And, how does that impact your ongoing research? But we're going to the extent possible, try, because we can be an influencer. So my comment to you is, in terms of using ethically collected data that doesn't have copyright issues, that doesn't have or has the smallest possible amount of bias, that as a customer of that data, you can try to influence. We all have like one small voice, but all together you can influence their behavior. So I encourage you to do so.
Yeah, that's wonderful. As a pediatrician and researcher in pediatrics, we would distinguish when we're doing research ethics between personal health information and anonymous information, and the consent necessary is different, of course. And there is a number of studies that we are able to do using anonymous data. Even though that data was harvested from a person somewhere, but once it's removed from personal health information, it's not held to the same standards. Because, as you said, the reality of trying to extract their data from a training model it would be next to impossible if someone every month someone else is saying, well, now I want my data back, and they have to retrain the model again. But there needs to be a point at which the data is associated with them as an individual, and then a point at which the anonymous part is harvested and disconnected from their personal health information. And thinking about what it means for the data once it's disconnected from the personal health information, because I think in general the research ethics world would say that's where if you've given that data and it's no longer associated with your identity, now it's just data as opposed to your data that you have rights over. Whether that's right or wrong is up for other people to decide.
I would argue that in many scenarios, it's not true anonymization, it's pseudonymization. There's a number. You can keep adding to the data that you collected because the personal health information has been reduced down to a number. And that number can be reversed back to your identity, depending on the protections that are in place and the scenario. And when it comes to PHI and medical research, the researcher has zero incentive to re-identify people. So I think that really handles the risk, but the risk is still somewhat present.
At a certain point in the study, there's that identifier which connects the data to the personal health information. As soon as you've accomplished everything you need to do with the personal health information, you delete the identifier, you delete the connection. At that point, it's impossible.
Yes, I agree. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, it's Michael. I'm also senior fellow at the Cyber Intelligence Institute in Germany, and I want to talk to Yuki, if your voice is back. I really find your paper and your presentation interesting because it points to the inconsistencies of the law. And also Ryan touched on this. It's like we have it on a constitutional level. When is it your right of your own picture? That's how we call it in like German constitutional thing, that right to publicity. When is it personal data? When is it privacy? When is it data protection? And for many years, I think we could live with these inconsistencies somehow. But as we move on, I feel like we're working with these concepts, which are, first of all, different. We have like copyright, and then there's data protection, and they're all more and more overlapping and becoming more and more like this, what we call cyber law or whatever. So I just want to stress the need to talk about these distinctions and also encourage you to really include what is it, maybe a copyright issue, or how does copyright law and also around the world solve it? How is data protection actually the right point? Because also in data protection, we have these inconsistencies, like you talked about this anonymization. Really, nobody really knows when data is anonymized. And I mean, it's kind of crazy if you think about it. The legislator says, oh yeah, if it's anonymous, you don't have to do anything. But if it's really personal, then you have to follow all these rules. And you said it for generated data. If you say it's personal, then it's everything, Why did we create such a law? So also I think maybe communities like here would serve to kind of look at these things. How can future laws kind of solve that better, and not just saying, oh, from a copyright perspective, it's like this, from data protection is here, and the American system is like this. So in the end part of this, I think you could raise many of these questions, also a little bit looking for the future of legislation. And I just wanted to encourage this and encourage the discussions here around also these topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful abstract on my paper. I think I should have just recorded it and then put it as an abstract. I can't agree more. One of my mentors, who is also in this room, who may have a sprained ankle, he's also my table ping pong rival. He has said in the past that I should not be talking too much, that not in this paper, but in a different paper I have this, or this is what I plan to do in a different one. I don't want to go to that. I don't want to do that. But at the same time, if you allow me to provide some context of this paper, this draft, it's as I probably wrote it somewhere in a box or whatever. It's a compilation of several chapters of larger work that I'm working on. And in the normative part, I plan to, or before going to the normative part, though, I'm thinking like there's a section of comparative approach where I draw from different areas of law, including copyright law, and then I was totally, I forgot about right to publicity, but also rules regarding disinformation, misinformation, and also about deepfakes, because these are also generated, maybe not personal, but generated data, right? And by drawing that from these, we can maybe think about how generated personal data should be regulated, and then proceed to how the current data protection law or anything else can be amended or converged, merged, etc., as Michael aptly said. So I really agree with you on that, and I will work on those issues as well. Yeah, if that's.
I have a question. I'm not a legal scholar in the School of Information, but I'm curious, and this could be for the room. Maybe we'll do a poll. You can raise your hands if you're a legal scholar or willing to pretend to be one. Go ahead. No one will know. So this generative AI thing kind of seeps into everything, and from today and yesterday, we've talked about all these areas of law, family law, criminal law, discrimination, privacy, data protection. And I wonder how much people feel that generative AI should be subsumed within or sort of addressed within existing laws, which maybe GDPR would be one example of that, versus it needs new specific targeted laws or carve-outs because generative AI is distinct enough that it needs something specific, that we don't want to munge it into some other thing because then it becomes too broad. So I guess the question is, should we mostly be developing new laws to regulate generative AI within these areas, or do we try to munge it into existing law? How many people would say the first one? What was the first one?
New law.
Okay, how many people would say we need new laws in all these domains? Are you legal? No, I'm just kidding. How many people would say munge it into existing law? And how many people don't know? Okay.
Maybe my fourth one is we can probably argue for both. So it depends, I guess, like very loyally answer, but it depends. Or maybe both.
I think this kind of, I don't know, this like teases something I've been thinking about the last couple of days, but like, is it the AI, and I'm not trying to do a law of the horse right now, but is it the AI, the use of AI that's worrisome, or is it the way in which we're not getting at the underlying harm that is now more readily facilitated through the affordances of whatever systems are becoming available? And then is the approach, like to part two, option two, is it actually that we need a better structure of protections and reparation where there is harm, regardless of whether it's AI generated or not, like stronger, privacy and dignitary protections, for example? Would those satisfy what we're perceiving as the problem of deep fake images of people? Or do we actually need something that targets the AI system specifically? But then my worry would be that becomes outdated very quickly and the harm continues because the harm actually comes from somewhere else, not from the AI itself.
Yeah, this came up yesterday, right? Too,
Yeah.
the AI, and it's sort of, is the AI more like, an atom bomb or something, which needs strict regulation just by its existence, or is it more like a car, which can be good or can be used for destruction, right? Depending on if you're using it responsibly or not. My instinct is the car for AI. I think it seems too hard to just say AI is bad, to the extent you accept progress and all these things, which maybe we're kind of all a little on the fence on. But so I guess that would be my reaction. And this came up in your question yesterday. I think the sexual deepfake example keeps coming up in like many of the papers in our discussions because it's such a clear case where it is being used to amplify existing misogyny and sexual violence, which is wrong, right? There's nothing good about that amplification of those dynamics. And so it's a clear case where you're like, yes, this use of AI should be regulated pretty heavily, and we should call it immoral, and we should teach people not to do it, because it's starting with a very wrong underlying societal problem of gender-based violence and misogyny, and then it's just sort of enabling it to be further. But other things like, medicalized children and whatever other cases I think are more complicated. It can be helpful, it can be harmful, but I guess, yeah, so my answer is generative AI is more like the car, and we should think about when it can be useful and when it can be harmful, and sort of address, optimize for one and deter the other and mitigate the other. But I'm curious what other people think.
As a total layperson when it comes to legal scholarship, so maybe I shouldn't even speak, but what has struck me today, even going back to robot facilitated crime, is that to me there's an outcome and there's an intention, and along with the intention is the tool development, and so you can deepfake Taylor Swift. People have been photoshopping Taylor Swift before that and drawing. The outcome is not particularly different. It's just the ease and rapidity of our ability to generate it, right? But it isn't that different than a photoshopped image of Taylor Swift. And similarly with the robot facilitated crime, if I use a gun to kill someone, well, I'm in the wrong. If I have a robot and I say, go kill someone, I'm in the wrong. If I have a robot and I say, I want you to defend my property, and the robot kills someone, and I bought the robot as a property defense, and the whoever made the robot gave it the capacity to kill someone, it's like, well, maybe we share responsibility, but certainly if I was led to believe that the robot would protect my property without killing someone, and it did, then the person who designed it is significantly at fault. And so I think that what I've been processing today is there are issues with how we either, train our images models, what restrictions we put in, train our self-defense robots, what restrictions we put in, and then there's utilization. And utilization is relatively impossible to regulate in a global world. You use the example of the atom bomb. The only reason the atom bomb has been able to be regulated is because plutonium and uranium are relatively rare. If they were abundant, then terrorists would have been creating atom bombs pretty readily, but it's difficult in military industrial complexes like the United States have been able to police access to the necessary components to make an atom bomb. But with AI being available to anyone in their basement with an internet connection, it's quite different. But like, I could be entirely wrong on all of that. But as a layperson just listening today, this has sort of been some of my reflections.
I'm not sure you have any military experts here to counter you, so maybe I'm not gonna. You're good.
Okay, sure. Maybe I should have clarified myself better when you asked that question, whether we should go with the existing law or coming up with the novel one. And the way I responded is it can be both, meaning because it depends on the jurisdiction that we are talking about. So under European law, maybe I'm just saying out, I haven't really thought through, but maybe just modifying existing law could be sufficient, whereas in some different jurisdictions, you want to have more specific ones addressing a particular problem. So that's why I said, like, there could be both cases, but the notion is, as you said, it's difficult to point what the issue is. And as Kristen said, it might be important to, I don't know, look at the larger harm, etc. So I guess there's no answer to which approach would be perhaps better. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion to have, I think.
Let me do one more poll. I think we're going to wrap up pretty soon and head into lunch. But how many people are excited and optimistic about the role of generative AI in our society and our upcoming futures versus the opposite? How many people are excited, optimistic, like this is mostly cool? Let's go here. How many people are concerned or pessimistic about the role of generative? My goodness. Okay, so Kate.
But what if the problem isn't the technology, but the problem is actually that we live in a political economy of unbridled corporate capitalism and, a culture that treats workers like replaceable commodities. And like, what if these small legal changes, even if we're holding companies accountable for individual things, or like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic? Like, I keep thinking about the panel we had during the workshop. I think we need to be thinking much more broadly about what we're inserting the technology into and setting incentives on a much broader level.
Maybe the poll should have been, how many people are excited about society in the US, we'll say.
Well, conversationally, and Teresa and I were talking this morning about the fact in Canada, it would make sense to do the work, to go ministry by ministry and jurisdiction by jurisdiction and figure out where you've got pre-existing that you could pull from. Like you go to different industry or different use, medical, financial, like we're not, but it's almost like we don't want to do that work and really identify. Instead, we're going the other way around. We're going from the like, this seems novel. Like it's funny because it just seems like who would pay for that work? It would be a lot of work, but like there is a way to figure out what the gaps are. You know what I mean? It's homework. It's homework, and it would have to come a lot of it from the state or from civil society. I don't know, right? But it's that, and also just on the macro, you've welcomed the macro here, is like trying to solve the ethics of austerity and the ethics of the technology. Like it's a no-go. But the reason this case is so interesting to me, the medical case, is that the ethics of like how much money goes towards specialized disease or pediatric disease or whatever else. I know that that's like, there's no fixed agreement within any democracy as to like, this is how much we'll allocate, right? So it always has this philanthropic component. And so I think that's why I forget who said it was very niche. It was you? Yeah, like it's so niche, and that's what we need, is to go into the context, the specifics of the economy and the specifics of like what that broader context is. So like, bravo, because I think there's so much specificity here, which is what we're lacking and which makes these conversations harder. So nice work.
Yeah, I agree. I think focusing on specific cases and context really helps enrich the conversation and making sense of things. So we will wrap up and head to lunch. Thank you.
Everybody. We've got an hour for lunch. We'll be back for our next panel at 12:45. Thank you.